Thank you. President IIC, Ambassador Shamsaran, Shri N.N. Boraji, Dr. Minachi Gopinathji, Director IIC, K. Srivastavji, ambassadors, academics, colleagues, present, past, hopefully future. It's really very good to see you, and I'm truly delighted to join you at the valedictory of this meeting. I heard with great attention the summary report of what had transpired over the last few days. And my own remarks, I'm afraid, are more prosaic, very empirical, but I assure you very encouraging. And they largely dwell around what Ambassador Shamsaran said, which is do not underestimate the political, and I would add the economic and other aspects of our growing relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, when many of us who haven't lived there or worked there ask others about the region, I think the first thing you're told is, it's very far away. Now, when I actually did travel there, it did cross my mind that there were more faraway places like California or, British Columbia, which has never stopped anybody from reaching there. So apparently distance is very much in people's mind. And actually once you decide to commit yourself there, I did find for my own satisfaction, there were actually fairly short and neat ways of getting there. And therefore, I somewhere, have put that behind me, and I'm busy trying to persuade others in that direction. And when I stand before you here today, just as a representative sample of my week, and this is only today, Wednesday, okay. I've already had one vice president from the region, Bharat Jagdev. I've just had lunch with two ambassadors from New York from the region. Last month, there were two presidents from the region, that is President Santokhi and President Irfan Ali. There was a foreign minister colleague of mine, Foreign Minister Devani of Latin America, of Panama. So the point I wish to make is a lot of the preconceptions are in our own mind, but it's not a point which is relevant to any of you because you already know that. It is a point for those of us who are charged with, I would say, policy formulation and execution in regard to Latin America and the Caribbean. So how does one deal with it? One deals with it really by creating compulsions, by demonstrating contact, by frankly working the relationship. And working the relationship obviously can have many aspects, some of which are very evident in the room today, in what you've all been discussing over the last few days. But I put it to you that if there has to be a firm foundation for a sustained and intensive interaction, it has to be built on business, and it has to be built on stronger people-to-people contacts. Obviously, government has a role, government has to lead, government has to encourage, government has to shape where necessary resource. But finally, any relationship, and we've discovered we've discovered this even with North America, that if you look today at our relationship with North America, a lot of that is really built on business and it is built on people. So I am focusing much of my remarks on those aspects because I believe that it is by taking those forward that we will create the framework on which many more activities can take place, and those activities to my mind are very important because if you have to relate to other societies, if you have to talk to them, you have to, in a sense, have a feel. You have to know the music, the literature, the people, their history, the food. I mean, it comes, and it's a universal principle for every country. Now, when I became foreign minister 4 years ago, a colleague of mine sitting in the front row very helpfully sent me a piece urging me to pay more attention to this part of the world. And the key bit was a piece by a Chilean ambassador. I suspect, sir, it could be you, which basically said, until the foreign minister of India himself pays attention to Latin America, how is that relationship going to develop? Now, the first reading, I wasn't, I didn't think the foreign minister of India had to do everything. You have colleagues who also I work with. But honestly, even before that, actually, we had started a process of really globalizing our contacts, of really reaching out very much more than we used to. And there is a purpose for that, which I will come to. So, when I actually, in preparation for meeting you, said, okay, can I get a sort of a 4-year report card and a 9-year report card, because I used Prime Minister Modi's government in 2014 as a kind of a marker. I actually found that in these years we've had from India 6 visits by the President to the region, 6 visits by the Vice President, 4 visits by the Prime Minister, 4 by the External Affairs Minister. In this case happens to be me, but in my defense, I'm going next month again to 4 more countries. 13 of different cabinet ministers. And our ministers of state, I think, have pretty much covered every country in Latin America and the Caribbean. And what it has done is it has in turn encouraged the reverse flow. So during this period, we've also had 37 major visits from the region. 7 by the President, 5 by Vice Presidents, 15 by foreign ministers, 10 by other ministers. So the reason I say this to you is that the assumption we had that somewhere, there isn't enough attention, there isn't enough contact, there isn't enough traffic. I think the evidence of the last decade has started to challenge that. I'm not suggesting to you this is where it will stay. I think there's a lot of room. There's a very strong case for why that should grow. But this really was the first point I wanted to instill. Ambassador Shyam Saran also spoke about politics. During this period, we opened 2 embassies in the region. And both had a very interesting backstory to them. One was in Paraguay, and the other was in Dominican Republic. Now, in the case of Paraguay, it was something I was personally, in a sense, encouraged to do. I met my Paraguayan counterpart in 2019 on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And he, after the preliminary courtesy, said, I've never met an Indian foreign minister, so I want to ask you one question. What have we in Paraguay done to offend you? So, obviously, it sort of took me. He said, look, ever since we can remember, in every conceivable forum, we have been supportive of you. We're still trying to figure out, why don't you have an embassy in Paraguay? And the first thing I did when I came back was to tell the Prime Minister, I really need to open that embassy. And I not only opened that embassy, it got delayed because of COVID. But I promised him, which I kept my word, I went to Paraguay and actually inaugurated that embassy. Now, the other embassy I opened was a different story, a story which some of you may be more familiar with. We had a wonderful ambassador here from the Dominican Republic. And there are no superlatives to describe him. He's now in Moscow. And I was foreign secretary then, and he would keep badgering me, saying, look, I'm the dean. And you don't have an embassy in the country from where there's the dean. And during his period, if you look at the trade between India and Dominican Republic, those of you who may not be immediately familiar with trade numbers, we are talking triple-digit millions here. So I am citing these two examples really as a foretaste of what is to come. I think this is a region which has a very powerful case for much greater interaction, much greater presence, and that is the case really I want to make before you. So the first case I would make is really a case for trade. And here again, it's interesting when you drill down and look at the numbers. Our trade today with Latin America and Caribbean annually is $50 billion plus. And just to put that in perspective, our four big trade accounts, which is the US, China, European Union, and ASEAN, are somewhere between 100 to 110, 115 billion dollars. So already Latin America and Caribbean has come up to half the level of the highest set of trade partners that India has. But it isn't just a numbers game that I'm putting before you. When I speak, and by the way, I must also tell you, barring a few foreign ministers, I think I have the WhatsApp number of almost everybody in Latin America and Caribbean. And even during COVID, probably there was not a single minister to whom I did not have at least one conversation. So I'm saying that to you not to demonstrate my WhatsApp skills, but actually to tell you today, the need for those contacts. So the fact that ministers take out time and speak to each other, there is something shifting out there which should be relevant. So let me come back to trade. Trade today is growing, and if I were to just give you two examples of countries where I was recently, where Brazil is concerned, we are either the fourth or the fifth, depending on how you count the trade, and the likelihood is great. So here is a country which many people feel is far away, other end of the world, and we are among the top 5 trade partners. In the case of Argentina, we are the third or the fourth, and here again, that position with the possibility of further growth up is something which is noteworthy. But I mention trade because if we look at the complementarity today, the demand from India for natural resources, for agro products, the demand in Latin America, Caribbean for what are essentially middle class consumables, for two-wheelers, for automobiles, for pharmaceuticals. Our pharma exports are really booming in that part of the world. And I can see many more as manufacturing in India picks up and becomes more competitive. So there is clearly, and the deeper middle classization of Latin America provides a market which a stronger Indian manufacturing clearly sees of great value. Again, when it comes to trade in services, here I actually had some insight from the brief period that I spent with the Tata Group, that the IT companies, trade in services among them, employ more than 100,000 people today in Latin America, and again, it's growing. The second case I would make, which is related, is the case for investment. Because a lot of our investments there, a lot of our interests there, are in areas which will require us to be there, to put resources out there. And there are some truly impressive cases there. Again, I'm citing to Brazil and Argentina simply because of my own familiarity, and I'm sure in my next trip when I do Colombia, Panama, Dominican Republic, and Guyana, I'll probably come back with more. That there is today, you have, say, something like power transmission. One of the biggest companies in Brazil is India, mining. In terms of, again, if you look, I'm now switching back to trade. The Latin America actually has become one of our most important sources of edible oil. When we typically think of edible oil, we think Malaysia, Indonesia, palm oil, or Ukraine, sunflower oil. But actually today we are sourcing heavily out of Latin America, especially Argentina. So I can, see that there are a very large number of sectors. And among them, to me, the one which holds a lot of interest is energy. That Indian investments in energy abroad. We had invested in Venezuela. Our investments in Brazil are growing. We have some very active discussions with a few rising, really important energy producers there. I think some of you would guess who they are. But energy, again, ours is today a globalized economy whose demand on resources and products from the rest of the world is actually going to rise exponentially. And if you are to look at resources and demands, we speak of the rest of the world, a very large part of the rest of the world is actually Latin America. So now let me come to politics. There is I would say, almost a intuitive, convergence between many Latin American countries and India when it comes to the big issues of the day. We have a history of working with some countries. I think Ambassador Shamsaran would remember working with Mexico when it came to disarmament, discussing nuclear issues with Brazil and Argentina. But again, I would say right now we hold the chair of the presidency of the G20. When I look at my colleagues in the G20, a G20 in an exceptionally difficult year, we've already been through one difficult year as part of a troika under the Indonesian presidency. My three colleagues with whom actually I could work, it was almost, you kind of were on the same wavelength without even a discussion, were actually my three colleagues from that region, from Mexico, from Brazil, from Argentina. And our collective role in supporting the Indonesian presidency and ensuring that, the G20 found a landing ground on the most difficult issue, the Ukraine conflict, and actually created, led to a successful Bali summit, was something which was very important. But I see this beyond, because I think when it comes to the big issues of the day, the issues that we debate in the UN, in the G20, in COP meetings, these are countries with whom their aspirations, their interests, their history is very similar to us. So there is a natural bonding here, there is a convergence, there is a legacy of working together, which I think has got revived. I also want to say make a particular mention of the countries where there is a large Indian community. I particularly refer to what are called Girmitia countries, where there were indentured labor taken 150 years ago. And these are countries where we have a very strong emotional connect. We have a historical obligation. We have very strong cultural empathy with these countries. And I can, state with a great deal of certitude that these countries would be very much part of our policy of connecting with the diaspora in the sense not only of people who have Indian nationality, but of communities who have their origin at some point of time in India. So again, I had mentioned earlier the presence of Presidents Irfan Ali and Santokhi at our Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, our diaspora gathering at the beginning of the year. And we see these relationships growing because in a lot of these countries, they today look to India. They look to India for refreshing and rejuvenating their roots, their connections, their traditions. I mean, it's not unique. It's not unique to these countries. I mean, it is there with all the countries, all the Girmitia countries. I mean, 4 days ago I was in Fiji. It had exactly, the desire there was very, very similar. So we will pay much more attention, invest much more in different ways to strengthen the connect with the Girmitia countries. When it comes to global issues as a whole, again, I think the thinking of many countries, most countries in Latin America, Caribbean, very similar to us, especially on issues like climate change, climate action, climate justice. There are a lot of small island developing states there. These are countries for whom we feel specially. We have stood up for them. I do, when we look at initiatives that India has taken, initiatives like the International Solar Alliance or the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, these countries have actually been very enthusiastic, very participative in this. Many of you would also be aware that over the years we have actually done a lot of development partnerships abroad. Obviously, all these are with developing countries. Most of them are, of course, just in terms of numbers and value in our immediate vicinity. But even already, where Latin America and Caribbean is concerned, we have 40 lines of credit, and they are roughly our commitment is about $900 million in these projects. 20 of these projects have been completed, and many of them are really projects with great infrastructural value, great community value, in some cases demonstration of something like renewables. So this too is a vehicle which is increasingly part of the I would say the armory, where vehicles can be armory, whatever, vehicles part of the fleet of Indian diplomacy. I think as India's development partnerships and development projects grow across the world, and already we are present in some form or the other in 78 countries across the world. I think a big part of this would be in Latin America and the CARICOM. One part of it is the development projects. The other part of it is also the development experiences. In the conversations I've had with colleagues, because again, I spoke about the visits, and that's a kind of I would say a metric that a foreign ministry would naturally use. But actually what it doesn't capture are the continuous spate of meetings we all do today in diplomacy. Gatherings which are regional, gatherings which are domain specific, maybe in the UN, in other forums, in the Commonwealth. And these congregations again provide a basis for greater bonding there. What we do see from that is a lot of interest in how India is doing on digital delivery, how India is doing on renewables, on energy efficiency, how India has done in health access. Because one part of the transformation of the last decade, which we in India take for granted because we are living there amidst that change. So for us, it's organic, it's incremental. If the number of people who are beneficiaries of Ayushman Bharat increase by 50 million, you will not even notice it. But those who are watching us from outside, when you actually share those numbers with them, that today actually there are 500 million people in this country who are taking pension from some kind of scheme. That same number of people today actually have health access. That 800 million people get food support. That 450 million people actually get money into their bank accounts. Now, much of Latin America, and particularly today, given the trend lines in that region, this is a region which is naturally left of center. And a left of center, regimes and outlooks which are left of center and have a direct interest in what is happening with other developing societies who are also building social safety nets. And in that respect, today, the largest experiment, experiment is the wrong word, it's something now so big that it's no longer an experiment, is actually taking place in India. So a lot of our conversations today with Latin America are actually on the digital delivery, what is happening, how do you lower, price costs. And I can say, it's not just the foreign ministers. In many cases, it's the ministers of finance, the ministers dealing with health, the ministers dealing with digital. They are the ministers or the officials today who are the maximum interest in engaging us. We are, of course, apart from engaging the region bilaterally, we are hoping on an institutionalized basis to engage the CARICOM, the CELAC, SICA, and each of this to differing degrees is work in progress. You will be seeing that unfold bit by bit. But collectively for us, every country of the region was in some form covered by the Voice of Global Summit. The meetings which we did in the first half of January, because we wanted to consult all the entire South before we took their collective ideas and interests into the G20. The vaccine, the COVID, and of course the vaccine Maitri was the most, I would say, effective way of demonstrating our bonding with the region. And if any of you have time, I would say the most expressive utterances on this subject you will find on the YouTube. If you want to really pick up on what the world thought about vaccine Maitri, on their getting vaccines at a time when many producers and many stockpiles, there were stockpiles nearby which they could not access. And if you want to see, really the sentiments of the world, I would recommend just look at the YouTube. There are some really heartfelt expressions of that. And finally, of course, while I'm talking vaccines, one area, and perhaps this is something food for thought, food is not the right word, but we are looking at traditional medicine in a big way. The WHO has created the first global center for traditional medicine in India. It is in Gujarat. And what we want to do is really to gather the traditions here in that regard and see how, in a way, we can mutually support each other and make that grow. And in that exercise, again, we feel that a lot of Latin American traditions will be very, very important. So I would really, as I said, I hope the picture I presented to you is a hopeful one, an optimistic one which promises really much more activity and much more contact. But it is important for us that while the bread and butter issues are taken care of by people like us, that the rest of the relationship also finds expression. Because really, man doesn't live by bread alone. So there are so many other aspects of relationship building, and that is where I believe that the intelligentsia, the academia, the world of culture, the world of arts, the world of medicine, the world of knowledge. All these in different ways can really help build this relationship. I want to just emphasize, we have a goal of moving India towards becoming a leading power. And to be a leading power, we have to start developing at least the footprint of being global at some point of time. And we can't do that unless we are able to reach every region and not reach it superficially, but have relationships that really count out there, investments of substance, cooperation that is really noteworthy. That is the direction from an Indian perspective that we are looking at the region. And therefore, I felt it is important I share this with you. Once again, I thank you, sir, for inviting me to join you all this evening. And really, thank you.